Hello, my name's Joe Brewer, and I want to share with you some of my perspectives and experiences from the week that we've spent here in the Greater Tkaronto Bioregion, connecting with different community members and exploring how we can create and live into a pathway of regenerative practice and regenerative livelihoods that is able to take the entire territorial landscape into the process. So, to begin talking about how we apply a bioregional approach to landscapes, it's important to remember something very important and fundamental, which is that everything happens somewhere. So where are we right now? We're right here in the middle of the Great Lakes, just north of Lake Ontario in the Greater Toronto area. We're in the midst of a large continent surrounded by two oceans on either side, and we're already seeing patterns of connection and interdependence that place this region at risk, or that this region could, in the future, help to stabilize. To help us get more familiar with where we are, I just want to ask you to think about this question, because you can see that here in the Greater Toronto area, we're embedded within a very important larger system, the Great Lakes. And if we ask ourselves how much water is in the Great Lakes, I've been surprised to learn that a lot of people don't know the answer to that, but also that what it signifies about this place on the planet. You see, the Great Lakes hold about 20% of all the fresh water on Earth. This is significant because 99% of the water on Earth is salt water in the world's ocean. Only 1% of the world's water is fresh water. And of that 1%, 20% of that water is in the Great Lakes. So just for perspective, this is the same amount of water as the entire Amazon rainforest. And now we all know that we need to protect the Amazon rainforest. It's a global asset of great strategic significance. But look at this. Nearly half of the fresh water on Earth is held in the Great Lakes together with the Amazon rainforest, which means the Great Lakes, in their own way, are just as important as the Amazon rainforest for the entire planet. So it's not just that, Lake Ontario is important to Toronto because it's on the edge of the lake, or that Toronto is close to the Great Lakes, so we care about what's happening with our neighbors. It's that this is a strategic planetary reserve with no parallel. There is no other Great Lakes on Earth. There is no place with this concentration of surface water. Even the Amazon, for it to gather the same amount of water, needs 200 river systems spread across half of a continent, just to give you a sense of the concentration of this land area. And you can probably already see that what I'm doing is I'm preparing us to think about bioregions, because I want us to see how the place we are is embedded in something larger. But then how do we draw the boundary for our bioregion? And this is where we define a bioregion. Bioregion is just a shorthand word for the phrase biological region. And so a bioregion is the entire context in which a life system can function for an entire biological population. And I think this really gets clear by saying that the entire life system of an organism and their whole population has some kind of a geography. And for me, I like to think of this with a simple example to really understand it. So I like to use starfish as my example, because starfish have a very well-defined geography. All starfish on Earth exist within what is called an intertidal zone of a coastline. This is a picture from the coastline of Oregon. And so what this means is that the entire life system for all of the starfish is between the low water mark and the high water mark of the tides along a coastline. Everything they need to eat, all of the places they need to sleep and have a home, to reproduce, their entire life system is embedded within the intertidal zone. And the intertidal zone defines the bioregion for the starfish. So what is the role of regenerative bioregions? I like to use this map of Africa because we all know Africa as a continent is huge, mind-bogglingly big, so complex, it's hard to wrap our heads around it. There are 55 nations in Africa. It's so big. But if you look at it the way that it's envisioned here, where someone has visualized all of the river systems, and you look and you see, well, there might be 200 or 300 rivers, there might be 400, but the continent has naturally organized itself into its watersheds, which means if someone wanted to regenerate and restore the health of the entire continent of Africa, they could set up projects in each of the watersheds, and each watershed could work on the holistic health of the watershed. And there might be 300 or 400 projects that collaborate together to restore the entire continent. And this reveals the power of bioregions. Bioregions are coherent ways of understanding geography for the life system of the land itself, so that humans can align themselves with and co-create with the holistic system of the landscape. So if each bioregion is a whole system, then it can be a whole system model, meaning we can actually model it computationally or conceptually. We can model it for its own regeneration. Said another way, we could study something like a watershed for a river, and we could say, this river is a whole system. It's not healthy. How do we understand how to make it healthy again? And we need some kind of scientific model, some kind of narrative model for what the health is of that whole system. And then we can begin regenerating and restore its health. And so if human beings organize ourselves into bioregions, then we can actually create a planetary network of bioregions and cultivate learning exchanges between them. This is a very powerful landscape. This is a landscape that has held human cultures, human economies, extended trade networks for at least 12,000 years. And some of the indigenous peoples of this territory would say that within the spirituality of their worldview, it goes back even farther. What's important to note about the open-endedness of deep time is that 12,000 years ago, most of this landscape was still covered in a deep layer of ice. And that for the last 2.5 million years, the dominant personality of the landscape was what ice did to the Earth's crust. This is why there's the Oak Ridges moraine, which is a giant sponge capable of holding and storing almost all of the water that falls to it from the sky, and then releasing it as rivers and streams across the landscape. Almost like this giant sponge is also a giant heart that is pumping the living blood of water across the landscape. And I am sure that the indigenous people recognize the sacred significance of such a life-giving land feature. So, how might you imagine bioregional learning centers and collaboration among projects in the Greater Toronto area? Would you organize them around the Oak Ridges moraine, for example, some of these other lakes, some of the watersheds? How are you already organized as a bioregional learning center? How are you already organized as learning communities for this kind of work? What can the Greenbelt do to organize this nested capacity for resilience? How can the Greenbelt become an anchor from which to build outward all the way to the Great Lakes and possibly all the way out to the continent of North America? You know, when I looked at the Rouge Park and I looked at a map of it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Can the Rouge Park weave into a bioregional pattern? Or is it already a bioregional pattern? how does the existence of something like the Rouge Park increase cultural coherence so that people in different neighborhoods, in different cities, and different jurisdictions can already come together and collaborate around the conservation patterns of the Rouge Park? And how could they do that for other parts of the Greenbelt? And so this is my introduction to the conversation we're going to have. This conversation is not a conversation between me and you. It's a conversation between this landscape and the planet, and between past generations and those in the future.